Today we'll be covering lesson 5-2, midpoint on the coordinate plane. On the very first slide, you should have seen our learning targets, which you should have unpacked already. And in the slide that preceded this one was a paragraph on how we've defined midpoint in a one-dimensional setting on just a number line. Today we're going to actually look at midpoint on the coordinate plane. So going from one dimension to two dimensions, where we've got the x versus the y axis. We are going to be chunking our lesson into two separate sections today for this particular lesson. The first section is going to cover questions 1 and 2 in its entirety. So 1 starts with this picture here, and it goes all the way to the bottom through the table, and then you'll see question 2b at the top of the next page. So we've got 1, 2a, and 2b. So let's take a look at what 1 says. 1 says, in the table below, write the coordinates of the endpoints of each segment shown in the coordinate plane. So we're talking about this picture that's been given to us. Says use appropriate tools strategically. Use a ruler to help you identify the midpoint of each segment. Then write the coordinates of the midpoints in the table. So you're going to start by finding the endpoints, and then you're going to find the midpoint. Now, recall that we talked about midpoint, and it creates two congruent segments. So it's basically cutting your line in two equal parts, or in half. Okay? After you find your endpoints and give the best ability to find your midpoint, then we're going to go back and look at the coordinates and see if we see any type of patterns. Here in 2a, it's going to ask you to compare your x coordinates of the endpoints of each segment with the x coordinate of your midpoint and describe any pattern you see. And in 2b, it asks the same thing, but this time it's asking about your y coordinates, not your x coordinates. To go through questions 1 and 2 completely, I feel like you're going to need about 4 to 5 minutes. So let's go for, see where we're at. And if I need to give you that extra minute, I will. So again, I want you to do questions 1 and 2. Now, don't forget, 2B is at the top of the next page. So 1 and 2A and 2B in 4 minutes. Go ahead and pause your video. As you can see, I have filled in the table for number 1. I went ahead and first identified endpoints. And then I went through and I looked and I said, okay, this is the midpoint visually. This is the midpoint visually. This is the midpoint of EF visually. This is the midpoint of GH visually. Okay. And so I went back and I I identified those points. And so I said, okay, if I'm looking at my x coordinates for question A, it says, look at your x coordinates for the endpoint and the x coordinate for the midpoint. Well, I had 2, 2, 2. Here I had 5, 11, and 8. 4, 6, and 5. 8, 14, 11. Well, 2 plus 2 is 4. And divide that into 2 equal parts. That would be 2, right? What about 5 and 11? Well, 5 plus 11 is 16. Divide that in half. I get 8. 4 and 6 is 10. Half of that is 5. And 8 and 14 is 22. And 22, half of that would be 11. I then followed the same type of pattern, but this time I looked at the y coordinates. Let me scoot up just a tad. I said, okay, well, what happens if I do it with the y coordinates? 2 and 6 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 7 and 7 is 14. 14 divided by 2 is 7. 1 and 5 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 4 and 0 is 4. Divided by 2 is 2. On to your debriefing question.